I let AI handle my email replies. But the most important decision I made in the whole project was not which model to use, or how to wire it up, or how many templates to write. It was deciding what I would never let it do. And that one rule changed everything about how the system works, how much I trust it, and honestly how much time it actually saves me. Before I tell you the results, I want to tell you the rule, because without it the whole thing falls apart. The rule is simple: the AI drafts, I approve. Nothing sends automatically, ever. That is the entire design. And if you think that sounds like a lot of extra steps for something that is supposed to save time, I promise by the end of this you will understand exactly why that constraint is not a limitation. It is the whole point. So why did I build this at all? I have a lot of email, not in a complaining way, just as a fact. A meaningful chunk of my week was going to replies that were not hard or interesting or sensitive. They were just repetitive. Someone asking how something works. A scheduling chain that takes 5 emails to resolve a 30-minute meeting. A question I have answered 100 times. I was not being thoughtful in those replies. I was just slow. There was no judgment involved. No relationship being carefully managed. Just a version of me writing the same paragraph for the 40th time. That is the problem worth solving. The goal was never to hand over my inbox. It was to stop spending real time on things that did not need my judgment, while keeping everything that does. The setup. Drafts only, nothing more. The system works like this. When a new email arrives that needs a reply, the agent reads the full thread for context. It checks who sent it, what the prior exchange looked like, and what kind of reply is actually needed here. Then it looks at a short set of templates I wrote myself. Not big elaborate templates, just a handful of patterns that reflect how I actually write and what my usual answers look like for the common cases. Based on all of that, it writes a draft reply, and then it stops. It does not send, it does not schedule, it does not move the message anywhere. It writes the draft and puts it in front of me. I can edit it, throw it out entirely, or approve it with one click. The decision is always mine. That is not an accident, it is the core design choice, and I will come back to why in a few minutes. Reading the thread for context. The part that makes the drafts actually useful is that the agent reads the whole thread before it writes a word, not just the most recent message, the whole thing. Because email replies that miss context are often worse than no reply at all. If someone followed up on something from 2 weeks ago and the draft ignores that history, I might as well have written it myself from scratch. The thread read is what lets the system produce something I can actually use, rather than something I have to completely rewrite. It picks up the tone of the conversation, notes what has already been agreed, and writes the reply as a continuation rather than a fresh start. This sounds small, but it is the difference between a draft I open and tweak versus a draft I discard and start over. Matching tone with templates I wrote. I did not use the model's default writing style. I wrote a small set of templates that reflect how I actually communicate. Not fancy, just the patterns that show up in my real replies. How I open a scheduling thread, how I answer a product question, how I close out a conversation that is wrapping up, maybe a dozen of these, and the system uses them as a reference when it builds the draft. This means the output sounds like me, rather than like a generic corporate assistant, which matters more than you might think. If I have to completely rewrite the voice every time, the time savings disappear. The templates are what make the drafts feel like a starting point rather than a foreign document. What it is genuinely good at. Here is where I want to be honest about the actual capability rather than the hype. The system is genuinely good at 3 categories of reply. Routine information requests, where someone is asking a question I have a clear answer to, and there is no sensitivity involved. Scheduling threads, where the whole exchange is just 2 people trying to find a time, and the back and forth could be resolved in one smart reply. And repeat questions, where someone is asking something I have answered many times before, and the draft is essentially a well-worded version of my standard response. In these 3 cases, the drafts come out clean enough that my edit is small. I change a word, adjust a detail, and it is done. For these emails, which make up most of my inbox on a normal day, the time saving is real and it compounds across a week. Scheduling back and forth is the clearest win. If I had to pick the single category where the system saves me the most time, it is scheduling. The back and forth on a meeting that should take 1 exchange often takes 5. Someone asks if I am free this week. I reply with a few times. They say 2 of those do not work. I offer 2 more, and so on. By the time the meeting is set, I have spent more time on the email chain than the meeting itself will take. The agent handles this well because it reads the prior state of the thread and proposes a reply that offers the right information in the right format to move things forward. It is not always perfect. Sometimes the proposed slot needs adjusting, but it gets me to a usable draft in seconds rather than having me stare at my calendar for 10 minutes trying to remember what I said last time. The 100th time someone asks, there is a specific category of email I started dreading before this. The question I have answered so many times that answering it again feels almost insulting to my own time, but skipping it would be rude. A product question I have explained dozens of times. A process question that has a clear answer I give every time. A request that always gets the same yes or no. Before the system, these emails got slow responses not because they were hard, but because I was tired of writing the same thing and kept putting them off. Now the draft shows up already containing a version of my standard answer. I read it to make sure it is accurate, and it is done in 30 seconds instead of sitting in my queue for 2 days. That is a real improvement in how my inbox actually functions. When do and I keep human, I want to be just as clear about where it fails or where I deliberately do not use it. Anything emotionally sensitive goes straight to me without a draft. If someone is frustrated or dealing with something difficult or the relationship matters enough that the wrong tone would cost me, I write it myself. The agent does not have the context for that. It can read the words in the thread, but it cannot read the relationship. It does not know the history that sits outside the email chain. It does not know what this person means to me or what the stakes are. For those emails, speed is not the point. Getting it right is the point, and there is no shortcut worth taking there. Anything high stakes goes directly to me. Beyond sensitive emotional situations, there is another category I handle myself. Anything where a wrong word has real downstream consequences, a negotiation, a disagreement that needs careful framing, a commitment I'm making that I want to think about before I make it, a reply that will be forwarded, a message to someone who holds a real decision over something I care about. In all of these cases, the draft would save me a few minutes of typing and could easily cost me something much larger if I shipped it without enough thought. The system does not touch these. I do not even let it try. This is not a failure of the tool. It is just a correct read of what AI is and is not good for. It is good at handling the clear, the routine, the repeatable. It is not good at navigating the delicate, the ambiguous, the politically charged. The honest results after living with it. So what actually happened after I set this up and used it for real? The time saving on the boring 80% is genuinely significant. I am not going to give you a specific number because your inbox is not my inbox and the math would not transfer. But I will tell you that the category of emails that used to sit in my queue for 2 days because I did not feel like writing the same thing again now gets answered the same day. And the emails that used to eat 10 or 15 minutes of composition time for a reply that required no real judgment from me now take under 2 minutes that adds up across a week. It is not dramatic, it is just consistently there, like a small quiet win every day. And the 0 auto-send mistakes count matters too. I have sent 0 embarrassing replies because the system literally cannot send anything, it can only draft. That guardrail has a value I cannot put a number on. The errors I did catch. I want to be honest about the failures too, because they are real and they matter. The drafts are not always right. The system sometimes proposes a reply that misreads the tone of the thread. Sometimes it pulls in a template that does not fit the specific situation. Sometimes it is too formal when informal is right, or too brief when the person needed more. I have thrown out drafts entirely and written from scratch. I do not count those as failures of the system, because the system did exactly what it was supposed to do. It gave me a starting point and let me decide. The failure mode I was worried about, which is a bad reply going out without my eyes on it, has never happened because it cannot happen. The architecture prevents it. Drafting stiff, sending sneeze not. This is the principle I keep coming back to when I explain why the system works. Drafting is a safe operation. A draft that is wrong costs me a few seconds to fix or discard. A sent reply that is wrong can cost a relationship, a deal, a piece of trust I spent years building. Those two things are not equivalent risks, and pretending they are is how people build automation that blows up in their faces. I am not worried about a bad draft. I am very worried about a bad sent message. So the architecture reflects that. The AI touches the drafting side only. It does not have a send button. It never will. And that single rule is what makes the whole system something I can actually run in production, rather than something I tested for a week and shut down. A pleasant sense, this means turning down the thing most people get wrong about this. When I explain this setup to people, the first reaction is usually that the approval step defeats the purpose. If I have to review every draft anyway, am I really saving time? The answer is yes, and the reason is that reviewing something is much faster than composing it. Reading a draft and making a small edit takes 30 seconds. Staring at a blank reply field trying to figure out what to say takes several minutes. Those are not the same task. The system handles the hard part, which is going from zero to a coherent reply. I handle the easy part, which is checking it and adjusting. That division of labor is where the actual time saving lies, and I still make every decision about what leaves my name. So if you are thinking about this, if you are considering something like this, the most useful thing I can tell you is to design the guardrail before you design anything else. Decide what the system will never be allowed to do, and build that constraint into the architecture, not the prompt. A prompt that says do not send automatically is not the same as a system that is structurally incapable of sending. One of those can be overridden or misconfigured. The other just cannot get the send permission out of the hands of the automation entirely. Then the rest of the work is about making the drafts good enough to be a useful starting point, which is a much lower bar than making them good enough to be autonomous. Useful is easy. Autonomous is where the risk lives. I am not going to pretend this solves email, because nothing solves email. But it made the boring 80% of it faster and less mentally taxing, while leaving the 20% that matters completely in my hands. That is a good trade. If you want more honest breakdowns of how AI actually works in a real daily operations, subscribe and follow along. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.